The purpose of this video is to read Lesson 21, A Divided Nation Summary. The summary says, in this lesson you learned how a series of compromises failed to keep the United States from splitting in two over the issue of slavery. The first section we read was called Confronting the Issue of Slavery. The issue of granting Missouri statehood threatened to upset the balance of free and slave states. Northerners were concerned that if Missouri entered the Union as a slave state, other areas would also be admitted as slave states. Southerners worried that if Congress banned slavery in Missouri, it would try to end slavery elsewhere. The Missouri Compromise. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise resolved the issue by admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. It also drew a line across the Louisiana Territory. In the future, slavery would be permitted only south of that line. The Compromise of 1850 was the next section we read. The furor, the madness over slavery in new territories erupted again after the Mexican-American War. The Compromise of 1850 admitted California as a free state and allowed the New Mexico and Utah territories to decide whether to allow slavery. It also ended the slave trade in Washington, D.C. and included a stronger fugitive slave law. Remember, that is when the Northerners had to return any slaves that ran north. They could go to jail if they knew where a slave was and didn't tell people. Attitudes on both sides were hardened by Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. It told about the horrors of slavery and the humanity of slaves, that they were actually humans with feelings and families. And also the Kansas-Nebraska Act. I'm going to ask you guys about the Kansas-Nebraska Act in the next activity. And so we might have to go back on Wednesday to read more about it so that it reminds us what it's about. The Dred Scott decision. In 1857, the Supreme Court issued a decision in the Dred Scott case. African Americans were not citizens, and the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. So this was a huge blow to all of the African Americans, all of the slaves, all of the free people that were black, because it's saying that they could never be citizens, and that killed the hope that they had in being part of the United States. The next section says, from compromise to crisis. Anti-slavery activists formed a new political party, the Republican Party. The party nominated Abraham Lincoln for the Illinois State Senate. Slavery was the focus of debates between Lincoln and opponent Stephen Douglas. Lincoln lost the election of the Senate, but debates brought slavery into sharp focus. A raid, remember this where we read about the abolitionist John Brown. He wanted to abolish slavery, raised fears of a slave rebellion. Remember, John Brown went in to the armory and he wanted to steal a bunch of guns and cannons and bullets and all of that, and he wanted to arm the slaves, and that made the South scared. The election of 1860 and secession was the last section that we read about. It says Lincoln won the presidency in 1860. Soon afterward, South Carolina and 6 other southern states seceded from the Union. They left the United States and they formed their own country called the Confederate States of America. In early 1861, Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, marking the beginning of the Civil War. So all of this that it talks about here, skip it. what we're gonna do is we can cross this off, and what you guys are gonna do, typing in this area here, is just my one question that I ask you in Schoology. What do you think happens next? Because you guys did so much work in the last section, this summary section, you don't even have to do all that stuff there. You're only going to answer my question that I ask you in Schoology, and this says, write your prediction. What happens next after this section? That's all you have to do. All right, so here is, maybe you already know the answer and you're just gonna tell me what happens next. That's all you have to do. Then click Turn In TCI.